don't know where to begin even.
So, frame rails? Or start with weapon mounting onto front plate and weapon lock onto back plate.
Yeah, we need to do that as well. I think the important thing to do before we do much else is get the mount point for the link in.
Ooh, yes.
With this nylon bolt that may or may not do what we want.
If what we want is simply for it to be a bolt, then...
Pretty sure that one goes on the right, and I'm pretty sure that it's that way around. Yeah. The holes will look obstructed from one side.
Yeah, because there's a bit of
and that
paint in that one.
Yeah, the obstructed side is the one that goes to the inside of the robot.
Yep, these line up this way round, so I'm going to say that is correct.
Well, I don't know if it's the paint or what, but this doesn't slot in like the other one did.
Do you want to quickly run a normal bolt through first?
Well, I've done this one now, haven't I?
I'm just thinking the other one will have the strength to push any blockage out of its way, won't it?
What a fascinating video this is going to be.
So, anything to add to the list? The box. Oh, you've got the box of bolts.
What do you use a bolt for?
I thought you were going to
Oh, okay.
try running one through.
I thought you were still doing
Is it an
the...
M2 or an M3?
2.
There you go then.
I thought you were still going to be doing stuff with the...
I wasn't sure if you wanted to just do all of it with me passing you things, or if you were happy for me to crack on and get one done.
I think it does fit through there, it's just that I wonder if the nylon one is just slightly bigger than...
It shouldn't be, definitionally.
It shouldn't be. Doesn't change on what it is though.
Now, did we end up cutting down the screws that were coming through this?
Yes.
So I see 2 that are cut down, but not 4. These must just use shorter screws. Oh no, that's another one.
There should be 4 cut down ones in there somewhere.
Got them.
Right then, there's that part through. It's going to be so much less solid than the other one.
If it turns out to be a big problem, we replace it, I suppose, don't we? Especially, you know, after tech check.
Got a film video evidence of you saying that now.
It's okay, you're going to voice this over, aren't you?
Right, that's that link in place.
I'm not sure this was here. It doesn't really fit next to this hot glue.
I think there's every chance that it was glued on with
Whereas that one would.
There's every chance that the hot glue was put on without having the side thing on there.
You reckon?
I think so. You might need to scalpel some of the glue away, maybe.
having so much fun. The problem with cutting down the screws is it's much harder to actually find their hole with them afterwards.
Yeah. What are you doing when you're doing the front, aren't you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I hope I am.
This is the back. The back is going to go on here. I might screw that lot together, and then I can start putting in some of the wiring stuff, I think.
Yep.
Not that way, Sam. That's not the right way. Not too bad, yeah.
Don't get your hopes up for the other side, though.
Right, we got some like.
Yes, must have been done without the posts on there. That's annoying.
Right, have we got any? Just a few more cut-off screws that have like paint on them. Where did I put them?
They weren't cut off, were they?
For these ones, yeah, they must have been.
No, they were just short screws, I think.
Well, there should be some more paint on them, but I don't know where I put them. It's nice. Well, herein lies the first time I have to leave the frame to figure out where the hell I put something. I have no idea where. Because we've only got one short screw in this bowl, which is the one that goes for the. Oh no, I'll tell you right, I've just seen the painted one. Really short. Okay, so there it is. They're properly short.
So they're not the short ones, but they are short.
Yeah. One screwdriver not enough for you.
I was using this one all along. I left that one for you. So
Why was that over in front of you then?
I don't know. That must be where you put it back.
That doesn't seem like me.
I'm not sure this is going to fit back on at all, Sam. But I still wonder if that was actually the right-hand side. Because it would line up better. But at the same time, it does also sit up right here, so...
I don't know what to tell you. All my bits are going together nicely.
It's because you didn't take the challenging part on. Left me the more capable member of the team.
Ta-da!
Do you mind just trimming a bit more for that, seeing as you've got the cutting board to your side?
more to be trimmed. Can I have a look?
The other thing is, I don't know if I'm doing these the correct way round. It could be that they were that way.
No.
Would the hole have been further forwards or further backwards? Because further backwards would... Actually, you know what we should do? If you can just get that tacked in for a second. Just check the clearance on everything. Okay, something's immediately not right here because that was much stiffer than it usually is. We got the clearance though.
I think they're fine that way around, yeah.
Axle's a bit wonky, but I think it was anyway. I'll have to do.
The other screw should be reasonably straightforward to get in there. Right then, I need the beck, wherever the hell that is. There it is. Is there any stuff that you want to get detail on camera-wise? Not really thinking about that anymore.
Yeah. Just thinking, you know, the wonderful detail of this requiring a shorter screw because we made mistakes.
I mean, we can draw attention to that if you would like. I won't stop you. You just finish doing this fiddly thing and I can...
So I've put it in now anyway.
Nothing is perfect in this world.
Except me.
It's a bold statement.
Bold, yet accurate.
It'll be interesting to see how much pink dust we end up with everywhere.
More importantly, I want to see how much pink dust we can leave in the arena.
That's the
That is a bit better.
deck in place.
Veg.
Veg, right then.
Is it worth you putting hubs on rear wheels?
Yeah, should we reassemble the motors a bit? So that's that. Right, so I'll put these back together. Thank you. I need this one.
See, the main difference between this and the Robert Cowan video is that the way his robots go together makes sense.
But he knows what he's doing.
No, we know what we're doing. We can describe exactly what we're doing.
These robots have a coherent design. They're designed to be assembled.
This was made to be assembled. That's close enough, right? This is more concentric that way. It's equally non-concentric.
There's not really any special, I don't think there's any like special requirements for, I think they're all similar enough that they just kind of should all be interchangeable.
I mean, the hubs themselves are individual to the wheel.
The hubs are individual to the front or the back of the robot.
When I was trying to put these together, they also seem to be individual to the wheel, but...
When you say hubs, what do you mean?
Pulleys, sorry.
I think the pulleys should just kind of go together, but I might be wrong.
Slightly better, maybe?
Right, what have you done?
The paint is very fragile.
Dude,
I'll buff right out.
let me down. Right then, that's those back together. Suppose I should put them in the robot now.
No harm in it.
No, because I know.
The paint is very fragile.
Yeah, I wonder if we should have scuffed up the I wonder if we should have scuffed up the surface before we put the primer down.
Maybe. Because that does seem to have gone straight down to plastic rather than down to primer.
Yeah. One, two, 3, 4.
One of the things I really like about the fact we've painted this at all is that it's going to make any damage really visible.
Yeah. Right then, that's one motor on.
I'm not assembling these as such, I'm just pairing them.
So before I do that, I'm going to put the weapon servo back on, I suppose.
Yes.
First time to see whether or not that's still...
We did decide to have it wheel forward, not wheel backward in the end, didn't we?
It won't fit wheel backward.
Well, that's good to know. So every sub-assembly is done. Really not impressed with my work on this, apologies. In this case, not to Craig Danby.
Right, so for more sub-assembly stuff, this is the front, isn't it? This needs a speed controller with the foam tape on either side.
Is it a specific speed controller either side?
So let me think about that. The one on the right needs to be the one with the shorter power.
Shorter.
That one.
And the shorter signal there.
No, the signal's the same.
Why have I got it in my head that orange is signal? Turns out I don't really know what I'm talking about. That's what has become increasingly evident.
Turns out no one should listen to a word that Ryan has to say.
What a hideous sound.
We went pretty close to the edge.
We knew it was fine.
Yeah, but that's closer than I thought it would be. Closer. It's closer than I thought it would be, and closer than I'd like it to be. There you go.
Well,
that's the way the cookie crumbles. Hey, look, that little cutout there is somewhere where I can just stick this cable as well.
that's handy. Sorry, that's exactly what we intended.
Design.
I take it the speed controller's just happily sat vertically, they don't need any angling or anything.
No, just straight up and down with the...
Up or down?
With the long wires going to the bottom.
I may have set these a little high here actually. It can't be up there, can it?
Yeah, they can't be all the way up the top, they've got to be pretty well centred. Just for the benefit of the camera, these are not wood screws. This is all using threaded inserts.
These are highly specialised.
Each screw will only go in one place. Sorry, each bolt will only go.
We hand cut these threads. How's that for you?
Yeah, cool. Right then. So that's that. I reckon we should put the front of it on the last. I can't remember when to do that now. Don't know whether to do.
I would have thought.
Another frame. I reckon we should do the next frame.
So is there anything else we need to do that involves access from the sides?
Or we should put the wheel back on this.
Yes, that'd be very handy. Although we're also going to need to get that indexed correctly.
Got a chicken and egg problem here, I reckon.
We'll just do the old 90-degree screwdriver trick for that.
We're going to have to do some fiddling, but nominally it'll be somewhere in there.
Why does this look so much sillier in pink?
Because it is sillier in pink. It's also a lot better in pink. And with that, we can fit this in.
Is that definitely the correct side?
Well, they only go one way. And that's the way that one goes.
In which case, was the other one already done? Oh,
Way ahead of you, mate.
I'm just sat here being useless.
You've been snoozing.
I've been careful and patient is what I've been.
It's still a very pink robot.
You say still, as if it hasn't just become increasingly pink.
I know, it's just funny. Is all. Copyright. It was a content ID. Right.
You really screwed that one up, didn't you?
I did. I'm gonna screw something else now. Well,
Now you're going to screw it down, though.
maybe I'll screw it up. Maybe I'll hold it like this.
You're not me. That's come together quite well.
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost like we designed it. Right, now...
I mean, that was on the plans from day one.
Now for all the fun stuff. I'm getting all this...
Would it be better to have a bottom on now?
Gosh darn right, no, the bottom will just get in the way, I think. I mean, everything's going to get in the way.
I mean, it's just a terribly designed robot.
The fundamental problem is, at this point, it's a nightmare. In every way. Right then, this is going to go on.
Perfectly.
It's flawless. There's a screwdriver that I like.
It's over there. Not stolen by me.
For some reason.
Just to show that you put it in weird places.
How dare you? I put things in sensible places 100% of the time.
It's like a galaxy. Very beamed.
That one is a particularly beamed bolt, not screw. Oh my goodness me.
Remember how organised you had this once?
Once before this was organised, and I don't think it will ever happen again.
Question of getting everything in the receiver, I suppose, isn't it?
No, right. Step one is power to the
People.
Seize the means of power. That one. Which I can... Right, so I think lesson learned for next time. This is the last panel to go on.
Right. Well, left, actually.
That's power for that one. And I need this bad boy here. It's going to come up here. There we go. Nowhere near obstructing the link. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. And yeah, if this side panel wasn't on, this would be trivial. Yet here I am, persisting.
You're trivial.
Persisting anyway. How dare you? Persisting anyway. Right then. Oh no, where's the level one? The only
the only one you
Literally
need.
the only other one in that set that I need. Where is it? I found you. Found you. There we go, without floor. Right then, we need that. Right, so that's the power to the drive done. What more could you possibly want?
I mean, it's finished now, isn't it?
Yeah, right, we should also probably plug in the motors to the motor controllers. That would probably be something that's worth having.
Those motors deserve autonomy.
They will be controlled.
I feel like if you wanted to upload all this footage just in full, just title it Ryan being uncoordinated for however many minutes.
Yeah.
In fact, I just tried to stick the back of the tape down.
Well, and demonstrates why it's taken us so long to build this. Oh, come on. Get in there, you little shit.
I have to censor that now.
Oh no, I can't upload it anywhere, what a shame. Right. Those are the motors done. They're fully wired in. Now, this is where the fun begins.
We also need to do the weapon before the bottom and top go on. Which is going to be just a barrel of laughs.
Yeah, right then. So, shall I put the receiver in? And then...
Yeah, because we'll need that all up and running in order to do the weapon.
Now that I've taped over where all the labels are, do you know which one of these is the throttle?
I can get a diagram up, I'm sure.
I think that one is the throttle. There.
I mean, let's not guess, let's find out.
And I think that... Now, to remember which way round the speed controllers go. That's there, which means this one goes... Wait, this one's back there, which means the right one. That's that one. Yeah. Easy mode. Right. That one goes there.
So it goes...
This one goes
How many channels is this one?
there. 6, I think.
Yeah, it is. So it goes throttle, aileron, elevator, rudder, gear, auxiliary, apparently.
What's the furthest left? Is that the bind?
Yes.
There we go. Yeah, I've got it right. Don't need your stinking diagrams. That goes in there.
You got it anyway.
That goes in.
It's labelled in pink as well, so it's clearly for us.
Someone designed it just for us. And power can just go on any of them. It doesn't really matter. So that's going to go
Very matters.
there. And then the LED with its pink paint on it goes there. Done.
Right, get that tucked away and taped away then.
No, it doesn't need it. This is as designed, mate.
Yeah, get it tucked away into its custom-made hole, and then
Oh,
tape
yes.
it down at its designated taping points.
Oh, apologies. Yeah, let me just gently insert it exactly where it needs to be. Is this for me?
For any of your needs, I'm just going to prepare you a few bits.
Go like that. Okay. So like that. This goes in like this. We may have made this bit harder for ourselves than it needed to be.
That's not like us.
antenna's about to fall off.
Could probably just hot glue those on a bit as well, couldn't we?
Oh, there we go. We're fine. That's the one that I think is going to fall off, the one that I'm just pushing down. Right, nobody touch any of them. Right.
Should we give that note to our opponents? Please don't touch our receiver.
Nobody go near the receiver. The aerial is very delicate. It just tucks down there and it's
I
fine.
wonder if...
No.
If by some miracle we turn out to have weight, we do a fresh bottom plate out of polypropylene that's a little bit thicker. Just looking at the amount of stuff that is very near the bottom.
Oh, it's fine.
Especially now the back plate is thinner at the bottom.
Take a chill pill.
Look, my job on this team is to worry about things that might make us lose.
You want like the fact that we've built a rubbish robot?
I mean, I'll try and only do the things that we can change, but...
I don't actually know how I managed to make these things not suck last time.
You didn't. They sucked.
Thanks, I appreciate that.
I'm always here to support you.
I can tell. I mean, I feel supported.
That's the chair.
You can just do one as well. Can't go down there.
Okay. Two swears.
I never swear. I object to you implying any differently. And this wire is, of course, the perfect length, and there is nothing wrong with it at all, so no one say anything about it. No one say anything about this random fucking loop that I've got here.
Did you never shorten those?
They're the perfect length. There we go. See? Nothing that a bit of bright orange tape can't fix. Right. That's that. Wired.
Weapon. Pains me to say it, but weapon.
How do you do the weapon? With a push bar, remember? Oh my god. Right, how on earth are we going to do this? I don't know how much. We must have lost quite a lot of paint doing this as well, I reckon. How are we going to do this?
Shall we move it a bit more centrally so we can both get our hands on it?
Right, mister. Share your toy. Oh, well.
Alright, mister has been sat here like a mug doing nothing on camera.
I need the people to know that I'm the one that's done all the work. You have done nothing. Or is that the right way around?
Yes.
Oh dear. 40 minutes it's taken us so far.
That's it.
Yeah.
It's not as bad as I expected, although this will be another half hour.
On the hammer. Perfect.
Just check the weapon lock quickly if you've got another nail from there. I don't know how that's happened. The thickness of paint, I think, has done that. I think if we file the paint away, it'll be fine.
That's fine. Right then.
Right.
We need
So
to...
wires up. So first of all, we need to turn it on to get the servo to its forward or maximum, whichever.
Yeah, we need a link. Where did you put the link? You got it.
It was need a battery.
Nice, convenient, easy connector. Where's your cradle?
That's a very good question.
That would be a useful thing to have right about now, I reckon. I was about to see if the light actually turns on.
Well, it'll be the first test of that, won't it? Whether the cradle still works after we broke it, I don't know.
I think it's going to scratch the paint if I jam it in there.
Hmm.
Can't be doing that. That's what I might do. Just so that the battery isn't like...
Yeah.
Just sat on the weight of the thing. Right. So we got that. Then we need a...
Linky link. Light is on.
That's much harder, yeah. Right. Right, so the light is on. We've got power.
What's that hole for?
That's the hole that
Oh, of course, yeah.
comes through to that.
So, you need your transmitter. Mine is the one on the sofa.
Does mine have a battery in it? No.
Now, the good news is this is going to be easier. Now the weapon lock works properly.
Is it?
Yeah, because when we're doing it at full retraction, we just lock it in there and it won't go anywhere.
Yes, that's true.
Oh, you did the other side of the hammer as well. Nice.
We can't have one side sharp.
I thought we went one side. We were saying one side sharp, one side blunt.
I think you and I clearly have very different ideas about that. I'm not in beetle mode. Load. Beetle. Okay.
Do you want to just check forwards and backwards quickly?
Yeah, that's going alright. That's what I was just checking. Backwards.
I just wasn't sure if you could actually see that or if it needed to be felt.
You underestimate my power.
So that needs to be re-indexed round a bit further, doesn't it? When we do it up, you better do it that tightly.
Oh, I might have done it that tightly. Like an idiot. There I was thinking that past me wouldn't have done a stupid thing.
Get way more line than we need.
Oh, well, this is a nightmare.
You're a nightmare.
Well, fuck you too. Slowly catching. Okay. There we go. There we go. So it just needed some little pliers. That's all it needed. Little gentle touch.
Who could have seen this coming?
Little gentle touch with the pliers. I'll just cut that bit out. It'll be fine.
What, random jump cut?
No jump cuts. I'm gonna do a seamless transition.
Are we just going to do a full voiceover of this whole thing in real time? Think we should.
I think not.
It's basically a podcast episode at that point, isn't it?
Yeah, right then. There it is, out, right, so. Such speed, such ferocity. Right, so do we want to do fully fired first?
What do you reckon will be easiest?
I think they're both...
Fully retracted we can put in the weapon lock. It's a maybe we do that second, because that's going to be a bit easier.
Okay, that'll require, yeah, so fully fired is that way. I believe.
I'm not sure that's round far enough.
In which direction?
Should be further anti-clockwise, I think. It looks like it's in about the place it was, to be honest.
Nothing I do is good enough for you.
What would be, I mean, the best rule of thumb would be the middle of the range should be about there. So if you can put it to the middle of its movement, have that, like, back here.
No, that's not where it was. It was more like that.
It might well have been like that. That's not necessarily the best way for it to be.
It worked.
True. But could it have worked better? Although, to be fair, this way does give us better access to it. Or does it? We're going to struggle for access when it's all the way back. Access.
Well.
Although what I do like about this that is different to last time is that last time when it was retracted there was still a screw up. Whereas this time it'll be nicely away. Let's go with it, it'll be fine. Relax. What we should also do... We can't really do fully fired until we know where the ground will be.
Yeah, should we try?
Because at the moment we're going to be over-firing and stressing
Let's put it back here. Where's the nail? Let's figure out how to sort of get it in there. At least get one side of it in. And then we can...
Yeah.
What are you struggling with, mate?
Things might have settled since I was doing it. It could well have been just paint gumming it up as well, which now it's been in and out a couple of times.
I just think it's because you're a moron.
Also possible.
Right.
So, retraction side. It's a bright LED even in this light.
That's what we're good at.
And before we do this, are we sure that we're not going to swap the washers out? No, fuck it, that'll be effort at this point. Why would we do extra work?
God, I've got a sense of your swearing.
I mean...
Fuck's sake, Ryan.
Oh, well, should have done it my usual way. Right, so that is tight. Do you agree?
Yeah.
So that now needs to go around to the furthest screw back, which is going to be a bugger to access.
Does it need to go back to there?
Yes, it does.
Can I just take a second just to sort of get... Not that I don't trust you, but I just want to make sure I understand how all this works.
So if you imagine...
No, let me understand how it all works. Yeah, okay. I think we're going to be alright. And then we do that.
Yeah, so...
Just going to pull that one. Don't put the screw there. Yeah, okay, cool. Seems you did it last time, I'm going to let you do it again with your expertise.
See, what I'm probably going to need some help with is making sure that everything stays tight on the pulley side. That battery is not in a good spot right now. In fact, nothing's really in a particularly good spot.
It's almost like this is a poorly designed robot that's impossible to put together.
I think it's just the pulley position is very unfavourable right now. Also, it was easier before because we had the extra stick up there. going to struggle here. I'm going to really struggle here.
Well, we can move it around a bit more if you want.
Yeah, we're going to have to, I think, or I'm just not going to be able to do it.
Okay. Well, it's loose. You can just yank it off.
Okay.
Spin it to wherever you feel it should be.
It's probably a little more than I need. That should do it. We should probably tighten it on now, because as I move it around, it's going to potentially shift, isn't it?
It's not gonna rotate around the axis of the servo, and the power's on, so the servo's got holding power. As long as you don't take the pulley off, it's not.
I don't trust myself to not accidentally take the pulley off, and you shouldn't trust me not to either.
Perfectly safe battery. Wonder how many podcasters around the world are going to be yelling at us for our safety, or lack thereof.
I mean, we could quickly tape this to the outside, but...
That's just touch tight, but we can give that some beans a bit later.
I wonder if it's a good idea to just give this little wrap around here as well, because then it can't slip off in this part of the pulley.
Another area.
But it's also an area that it can then tighten up on us. Let's see how it goes without doing it.
Well, when this inevitably becomes looser than we intended it to be, we can wrap it around there at that point.
So that is feckin' tight right now. Let's try and maintain that tightness as I do this. Actually, I don't need to, because it'll be able to tighten still. Right, so what I need now, we'll have to work out how we can help each other with this, is need to maintain that tightness while tying this knot, which before I didn't have to do because it had the multiple wraps. So is it as simple as just getting a hand under there and holding it, or...
I don't know.
I'm just going to go for it and see what happens. It can always be tightened afterwards, thinking about it. Sorry, there's now saliva in this robot.
Brilliant.
Get used to it.
Bodily fluids have gone into the construction of this robot.
All of them mine.
Yeah, I don't think I've drawn blood on myself doing this.
Whilst I have in 3 separate places across 2 incidents.
I've not drawn blood building any robots.
Just doing other weird shit. So, what's now the best way to tie this off?
Carefully.
Well, you got the wrong teammate for that, haven't you? I wonder if we should blob a bit of hot glue down on it before tying it, which I appreciate. It's a massive pain in the arse.
Oh, I wonder if we should spend an hour waiting for nothing to happen.
It's that, or I can try and get it through again.
Oh, I believe in you.
One more for you.
I have great faith in your abilities. Hello, people outside.
Not really going to happen because it just grabs on the stuff that's already through there.
Hot glue.
So I'm thinking if we just hot glue around the bottom of the screw, it would just keep things tight while I'm tying it.
Nature's get out of jail.
That's not that tight, that side of it either. Well, I suppose there's a limit to how tight you can get something by hand, isn't there? It's not exactly guitar string tight.
No, but you can't do that by hand, so...
Just don't fire the weapon, will you? Just sever a finger.
So how's it go?
Very good. NASA's moon plans that I somehow only just heard about.
Oh, until they do it, I don't believe them. I was sort of like, oh, this might be interesting, and then it was like, we're going to do it on the SLS. It's like, no, you're not. Everyone knows this. I'll be amazed if that thing launches more than twice.
That bad?
Yeah.
What's wrong with it? Or is it more a question of what's right with it?
It's more than any other rocket that NASA have built. I think it's been at the mercy of politicians, and it has all kinds of weird. It just has all kinds of funky requirements. In the same way that, like, the shuttle was. I mean, it's probably a flawed idea in general, but it was made worse by the involvement of the government.
Yeah, and particularly the military.
Particularly the military, and I think there's similar things going on here, where there's sort of like a bunch of requirements that. Because there's like various states around America that all where there's a lot of jobs to be had in aerospace engineering, and so it's sort of like, well, this part's got to be built in this state because that senator or whatever is like, that's my requirement for funding this, is that this key component is built in my state, and the same thing from a whole bunch of states. So it's built all over the place at a massive expense, and then it'll be assembled. And it's just. I just think it's a poor use of NASA's money. I think what we've sort of learnt at this point, humanity has learnt is that
just the two of us.
Is that I think that commercial entities can launch most things, and I think that government agencies should be more about trying to come up doing the missions and stuff. Like the European Space Agency, I think works in a reasonably sane way, in that it's sort of like they come up with the missions and they will fund like the construction of the satellites and the landers and kind of stuff. But it's like, right, we need to get this into space. We're gonna contract that out to area in space, or anyone else. They could conceivably use other contractors as well. It's sort of like, yeah, we'll do that. And it's like with SpaceX is there, but there's also ULA, private launch company. Well, sort of semi-private. They've got a lot more government funding, but they can launch stuff. And then there's Blue Origin coming up.
Was that it stopping?
I think so, yeah. I don't know why, though.
GoPro, you're a bellend.
Don't do that, because you might actually make it do something.
What, just give up?
I don't know what it would do. Is it charging? Who knows? Who knows? Right then. But yeah, anyway, there's lots of other places that can launch stuff, and I just think it's a waste of money. I mean, and to launch the kind of payloads the kind of massive payloads that NASA wants to launch with it, other companies can already do it.
I managed to get it through again, by the way.
Yeah. Do we need the hot glue gun then?
It would be nice to still have it, yeah, because then I can back this first part off to tie the knot.
Not there yet.
Give it another day.
This is such a badly designed part of the robot. Oh dear.
But getting it tight was going to be easy, Sam. I think if anything happens as an on-the-fly change, it will be flanges both sides of this and flanges both sides of that. Which we could quite easily do. It's just not worth the energy at the moment.
It's fine.
You're fine.
Thanks. Appreciate that.
It's just fine. Just fine. This sounds great.
Probably shouldn't have put the oh, you just line those up. Good. I was gonna say. Well, for any of them, like the nuts probably can't go on until the for all sets of wheels, the nuts can't go on until the wheels are on.
Wow.
So you've chipped that paint for nothing.
I chipped that paint for science. We now know that it chips.
Provides no additional protection. Well, this is fun.
I should have just thought of it ahead of time.
Still not there.
That's got the battery right next to it.
Yeah, that's fine.
So many filings in that bushing.
Whose fault is that?
Both of ours.
Nothing to do with it. It was your idea, and you're the one that did
It
it.
was a necessity, according to people who know what they're talking about.
We blame you, viewer.
I mean, the whole thing is technically the audience's fault. Because with no audience, we wouldn't have carried on the podcast
Yeah.
to build this robot. You know, it's...
I want to see if the wedge lays flat now. That's what I want to see.
And the best thing is I didn't manage to lay it flat.
Oh, you make me sick.
I think we might need a bit of rounding off here, but it won't be a lot.
No, I think we will. I think it'll be fine.
You know what we should have painted?
Well, we haven't.
For when we're inevitably upside down.
It's
Right.
fine.
Just blob it on around the base of the screw.
What's the worst that could happen?
You somehow fry the beck. God, be generous.
That's all you get.
So don't try and pull that yet, you'll just make more.
Make your face, then you'll be sorry.
Everyone will be sorry if my face is made.
This glue gun is so rubbish.
It's just excitable, it's fine. Imagine if the whole robot just shot off.
Oh dear. So bad.
Now, a simple matter of Ryan being able to tie a good quality knot.
We're screwed. If we lose, this is why. Sorry. When we lose, this is why.
If we got a spare nail or something, a screw will do. Cheers, just lets me keep a bit of tension that way, and then walk the knot in. Any luck?
Walk it in.
That was not a good knot choice. It's an overcomplicated knot.
Well, it was not my idea.
I don't know why I'm in charge of knot tying.
Because you know how to tie knots.
Do I?
I can do a granny's knot. What else can I
What I
do?
don't know is how to do knots that self-tighten.
It's a job for machine learning. Do as you make a rope out of nanotechnology.
What are the finest tweezers you have?
Let me have a look. Where is the thing? There it is. I shall look in my book of spells.
To be honest, I've just used my thumbnails.
Well then, you suck. Some tweezers anyway. So I've opened the book of spells.
Right.
Done. Perfect. Let's go. Let's fight it.
Let's go much simpler. A simple knot for a simple man. If I'd thought ahead of time, I would have made the hole much bigger and just done a clove hitch through it, because that actually self-tightens properly.
Yeah, this is why you're in charge of the knots, you see. You know a clove hitch. I don't know of
I know
such
that a
thing.
clove hitch is a thing, can't remember how to do it, but
Well,
no, I can remember how to do it off of something that doesn't capture it.
what's about to move. I'm actually chip the paint undoing this.
Going to leave a reasonably long tag end on this. Well, actually, can we glue over the knot, please? Since we've got glue. Normally a job for soup. I don't know why you turn that off, and we're going to have another side of this to do anyway.
Well, because it just leaks glue for ages. It's
True.
annoying. It's like watching money leak out of the gun.
Liquid gold.
Maybe petty of me, but...
No, that's completely fair. So the knot is there. That's it. I hope never have to redo this, because that's going to be a bugger to get off. That'll do. Lovely.
It's going to continue to just leak money now.
I mean, you can turn it off for a minute if you would like.
No, we'll just continue to throw it all away.
Just waving the scalpel inside the robot, because why not?
Perfectly safe.
Right, so now we need to get it in a fired position.
Right then, away from the hot glue gun.
Should we be putting the... It's close to the edge. Should we be putting the wheels and wedge on before doing this?
It's something we could do for tensioning this, by the way. We can tie it like there, and then we get a little bit more out of it.
Might be worth doing that for the fired side.
Yeah. Do you want to put we can put wheels on it. Yeah, we don't need to like put them on properly yet.
Yeah, just so we get the correct level for it.
Yeah.
We know where it needs to go around to.
These are the back wheels.
Yep, and I've got the front wheels.
It's taking so long.
The fact I chose to do the R side of the robot, and the fact that this now doesn't go over the motor shaft for some reason. There we are. Right, as soon as it's round your side, have fun. Could just whack it on with a couple of nails if you wanted to.
Right, we'll come back to that. Let's
Well, no, we want it on so we know... Actually, no, we know that this has clearance anyway, don't we? It's fine, we don't need it.
Obviously that's not going to work, Sam.
Swat.
Loads of rain.
So that already has gone further round than we really want it to. ideal. I'm trying to think what we do about it.
I can reduce the range of motion in the transmitter for that.
But with what we were saying about... But if we... Hold on, stop a second.
Yeah, I'm not doing anything.
With what you were saying about backing it off a bit to get tension, maybe what we've got now is good.
I don't know.
Although no, because when we back it off, it will be taking tension out of what we're now doing. So yeah, if anything, we want that to be under a bit of tension as we do this. We want it to be almost lifting it slightly up. Maybe not that up.
This is not going to be perfect. I don't think there's anything we can do about it.
But we can try. Right, so logic time. This needs to attach here and go around, or should it go onto the other one wherever that is? It should go onto the other one wherever that is. See, I'd love to be doing this on both ends because it really does self-tighten. But today's word is self-tighten. I'm worried that goes a bit too far over to the right, really, but... Should I have put it on that one? I think I put the other one on the wrong one.
I think that's fine where you put it.
I'm going to put this one on the same then, why not?
No, I think that's right.
But if it was on the other one, then it would stay more wrapped when it fired, which is more likely to keep it under good tension. Ah, this will work, fuck it. I'm glad it's amusing from your angle because it's fucking stressful from this one.
Well, one of us has got to find it first.
Yeah.
In this case, it's going to be me.
This is where flanges would have just made life beautiful.
Well, we don't have enough thinking flanges.
We probably don't have weight for any thinking flanges. Now, if we glue that, is it going to be a problem if it fouls that?
Maybe.
That never comes further off than there, so it would actually be helpful, I think, if that happened. So if we just blob around that. That's the way. Did you think to weigh the glue before we used it?
Look, you're the one that keeps worrying about the weight.
Oh, I wonder how much weight the split decision is now hot glue.
I don't know. Enough.
It's clearly all on. Really should have checked that before, but... Cheers.
Right, and are we done with the hot glue gun, or do you want it again in a second?
We'll do it just over the knot, if that's okay. I probably won't spend as long doing the knot this time, because I now know what type of knot I'm going to do. Funnily enough, it is basically a granny knot. Perfect.
It's the ultimate in not technology.
It just works, doesn't it?
Not to be underestimated.
If we weren't gluing it down, I wouldn't be happy with it. But I wonder if I could go a third time with this one. It's a slightly more accessible hole and a slightly larger hole, I think.
That's a show title right there. A slightly more accessible hole.
I feel like our shared humour has got dirtier over the course of this build.
I blame you. You're a bad influence.
I'm finally being my real self.
We're clearly school children doing this as a school project.
See what, fishing's a lot bloody easier.
Yeah, that's not as fun.
Hey, don't knock fishing. It's always fun to torture animals for your own entertainment. Right, glue her up, cowboy. I'm never calling you cowboy again.
Good.
Let's get it from this side.
Do it from the other side, I damn well please. Cowgirl.
Oh, a moment of truth arriving here, isn't there? The whole linkage should just be glue.
You're just going to pull all the glue away slowly. Right, I'm turning it off now.
That's a little on the loose side. Hold up, don't move anything.
I think we can just like ever so slightly reduce the amount of rotation on the thing. I reckon that's...
I think what we'll have to do is clamp the rotation round slightly to tighten this up a bit and loosen this a bit.
Well, no, because I think it's got to be a reduction. So if I go fully back, it's where this one's a bit too loose. So I can go forwards a little bit to tighten up that bottom one. And then to do the same on the other side, I've got to come back off the throttle a little bit. So I think the range is like a percent or two too wide.
But there's basically a set amount of slackness in the system. And when we tighten one up, we loosen the other off. See, that's now loose and that's now tight. And it'd be nice if there was just no looseness in the system.
I don't think we can not have looseness in the system.
Unfortunately, I don't think we can either.
I reckon that's going to be fine.
The problem is, had I done a better job, it would have been better. And that's what frustrates me.
I honestly think it's fine. Like, that's better than it was before. First time we did this.
Part of me says we should really test it today and give it lots of sort of flailing around.
Yeah, we can
Part
do
of
that.
me also says that I don't want to have to do that again.
We're going to have to do it again. Like it or not. But for now, I reckon that's good enough. So I'm going to effortlessly pull the link out.
In terms of procedure, we should get used to weapon lock first and not reaching over the weapon, especially while on camera.
I'm a stickler for the rules. Right.
We should finish assembling, I suppose,
I'm
shouldn't
going to
we?
move this over to your side. There's
Yep.
a bit more that needs doing as well, so that needs to just go over there to cool off. You right?
Fine, yeah, just...
You shouldn't burn yourself on camera.
I mean, probably shouldn't burn myself at all.
Got to get the battery in the right place.
No, we just assemble. It's fine, it's done.
God damn it, that's not helpful.
It is fun, though. Come on, I've done the bit that stresses me, now I get to dick around.
No! I didn't do much dicking around when you were doing
Oh no, you
it.
didn't do any dicking around.
Oh god, these connectors are annoying. Come on. Right, so I think we need to put the base plate on next.
Honestly thought you were about to launch into the Wallace and Gromit theme tune there. So...
Scream's stuck in my head now.
Da, 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 da.
There's a slight gap at the back of our robot.
I'd say, if we can, maybe a new base plate. Or maybe a bead of hot glue. How bad is it?
Terrible.
Flip it over for me.
It's the worst bit of the robot. Oh.
I mean, we could just make new mounting holes for the base and move it back a
Just
bit.
slide the whole thing back a little bit. Just back it up.
Back it up, back it in, let me begin.
That's so awful.
Look, no one will look there, it's fine. Don't show it off! I admitted that I did a very bad job of cutting that.
Yeah.
I cut way too much, and I should have been more conservative.
And I've got the evidence that you did a terrible job. Right then, we need to put the wheels on now. Which is going to be fun. So, we will need one overpriced Bugglebots hub.
One overpriced paint butts up.
With custom
I mean, that
grub
is,
screw.
I think that is genuinely the part of this robot I'm most proud of.
Next time we should cut our own threads as well. Like in the grub screw rather than just in the...
What, just start with some basic steel stock?
Yeah, exactly.
Should we turn it down to size as well?
That'd be fun, wouldn't it? Right, that's that on.
You buy the lathe, I'll do the turning.
Goes there. I don't think I can afford a lathe.
Mini lathe? Sorry, middle of the...
A middle of there. That goes there. This is a drilled out 3mm hub because the robot shop suck.
Although their customer service is acceptable.
Yeah, but keep sending us up until we finally got the right ones.
Wouldn't it be a terrible shame if the next time we ordered stuff it was wrong again?
Oh, God.
I worked very hard to match all these pulleys up with their correct wheel for you. Why do I even bother?
Because you're a
damn fool.
Fool who forgets who he's working with.
We should probably have a washer between those, really.
We haven't got the weight for it.
Possibly haven't. Oh, we still have to weigh all this once it's together.
Yeah, there's one side of it.
I think the weight we're going to take out of the top plate for the link will make up for the weight of washers. Looking for. How do you get through the day?
Well, what you've got to remember is that in my day-to-day life, I can type the word that I'm looking for to find, and the computer finds it for me.
I think that with RFID chips in everything you own, you could sort of transfer that system to real life.
Yeah. But like, because I'm sort of thinking, well, where is this class? I don't have to remember where I've left the class. I just search for the class, and it will.
I had that problem in teaching as well.
Yeah.
I genuinely had that problem. I genuinely lost a whole class.
Let's maybe not admit that on camera.
That's okay. I was a volunteer at the time. So.
Oh, that makes it fine.
I've been at this school for like 2 months, doing a day a week. I told a class to go to the art room. I didn't know there were two. I was only aware of one.
I bet the kids knew, and I bet the kids knew which one you meant them to go to as well.
I think they were too young to do it on purpose.
Okay.
Or at least too young to coordinate doing it on purpose.
It doesn't take coordination. All it takes is one troublemaker to just walk at the front of the queue.
No, there's always one that is good for good's sake.
Always one spoil sport.
That one was me.
It wasn't me.
They're the ones that become the teachers. Or at least attempt to.
Right then. It's got wheels.
So we've got some extra screws. Although we're also missing two smaller screws.
That's reassuring. That's fine then. Doesn't matter. We're only using that for weight calculations, so I think we're fine.
Yeah, it means we've been overestimating all this time.
Right then, where did these pulleys go?
On the outside of the bloody wheels, Sam.
I don't know what you were worried about, man. This is all just slotting together nicely.
I checked them all for concentricity, make sure they were the best way round for concentricity.
I think you wasted your time.
Evidently, yeah.
Oh, I've got to put the damn right.
I think we put these in expecting them to be used for side armour. That's what it was.
Oh, yeah. What is this thing called? No, we've never intended side armour for this robot.
We thought we might add some at some point as a configuration.
This is going together exactly as designed.
I don't know, it's one of those big bulbs there. I think that might be from where I accidentally nearly stuck the whole robot
That's a
apart.
screw, yeah. Nearly honked out on it. Oh, this is fiddly.
I mean, if there's any robot there that someone could break in half in a fit of rage, it's probably ours.
It's fine. We have a robot that is quite literally on its side, indestructible.
Unless anyone finds out one weak spot.
Unless anyone gets, for example, an undercutter and just whacks it there, in which case we're a bit...
No, your driving will prevent that from happening. We generally should at least patch that with tape just so dust can't get in. You know, metal filings that might short things, for example.
Oh, no, it's...
Like happened to Kraken in an entire fight. Oh, that is satisfying. The tools we've actually used to put it together have been very limited. The tools we're going to need to take in order to service it, rather more varied.
What could we possibly... I mean, soldering iron, I guess. What else do you think we're going to need then?
Various... basically all the variety of saws, if we're making spare things.
You're going to have to make do with one hacksaw.
Everything that we would need to make new pulleys and things.
Right, have we got more M3 nuts? We do.
4 of them.
Precisely the number that I need. How convenient.
We need a couple more tiny screws though.
What for?
Top.
Oh, yeah.
We still need beaning as well.
Yeah. Beaning. Get on the screw, you little...
Get on the bolt.
Get on the device.
Get on the thread.
Get on the nail. Oh, my back is hurting. It's reassuring after...
Back-breaking labour.
It is, yeah. All this sitting down, man, it's a real stress on the system.
Yeah, but it's sitting down and doing work at an uncomfortable height. So just miming that made my shoulder hurt again. So
I don't mind it then.
just do it for real.
That's that.
We had 2 extra big bolts in there as well. It's all weight.
Oh, bloody hell, I've just pulled some paint off.
Who would do such a thing?
Fools who don't know what they're doing. Right. That's that.
Or arseholes who know exactly what they're doing.
I suppose you're going to want to put the front end on there.
I suppose we could, couldn't we? How did I do?
Well, I can screw this panel down. This is a pink robot.
This is the first time we've really seen it, isn't it? I do think it could use some contrast. I really do.
No, we set out to build a pink robot and we have done exactly
I mean,
that.
the green is doing it for me. I could do the... Actually, no, that's alright. Oh, grippy. Such a grippy boy.
Male robot, is it then?
Obviously.
Yeah. What else could it possibly be?
I do think we should work to paint the edge of that.
Oh,
Or-
Mr. I want contrast.
Could we, generally, just a little line of black along there could actually look really good? Shh.
Shockingly, Ryan is knocking things over.
Look, it's a first during this build process. I don't know if this is because I'm just not lined up, or if I'm not actually even all the way through this yet. Okay, I'm just not lined up. That's reassuring. That is a bit tighter than it used to be.
We've got paint in there.
It's pretty flat. I do think we need to loosen it off a bit though.
How? It's not tight, like, it's just... That's just the paint, man. It's fine.
Yeah, we might just have to give it a few wiggles to wear it down.
Okay.
How much clearance is there on either side? Could be that I just do a bit of sanding on the outside of both of these. It's a little mommy spider. Well, I mean, we could put the top panel on just for aesthetics, couldn't we? Or do we, you know what, let's take the time, do it right, let's mark where it needs to be, quickly go drill it and have it properly finished off.
Drill what?
The hole for the link.
Oh, for the link. Oh, no, I just want to... This is its perfect, unblemished appearance. I want to drive it.
You can't activate it.
Yeah, but we can activate it and then put the top panel on.
Then you can't deactivate it quickly.
Just like... off of it. Let's be fine.
If we just screwed this side on, would it? No, it wouldn't.
But let's just put the battery
Let's just
in.
not... Okay, we can do it, but we're not screwing it on, because I don't want...
Saying we should screw it on. I'm literally saying we should put
should
the
probably
battery
bolt
in,
the front on
do
there.
that, and then just stick that on there, and then and then do a little
Yeah.
twitch test on the table, and then everything will be fine.
Do you want to quickly bolt the front on?
Do you want to bolt the front?
Yes, I want you to quickly bolt the front on.
It's not something you want me to do.
You're doing it slowly, I said quickly. It should already be done by now.
You, my friend, can go fuck yourself. Get on the thing, you... There we go. See, nuts always listen when you threaten them. And take it off again.
Now I'm seeing it, I'm glad we've got that down on the ground.
Oh yes, that's
Now
made.
before turning it on, do we weigh it?
We'll put the battery in.
So it'll be a very hollow victory otherwise.
We'll put this battery in. It's perfectly safe procedure for putting...
I love the way the wires come over top of the link.
Don't tell people that.
The wiring is extremely organised.
It's like an electrical engineer did it.
Well, 50% of one.
50% of an out of practice electrical engineer did it. And it's just... Oh, you fucking dummy, Sam. I can't put that wire on the floor.
Does it literally not go to the floor?
Well, no, because it's coming over this wire here.
Just do the battery upright for now. It is fine. Final assembly.
Oh, don't stick it to the wheel, because that would be a bad idea. TM, there. Right then.
Get the link in, quickly screw it down,
Let's put a link.
and then drive it onto some scales.
Well, no, you want to do a weight test before we drive it, I assume. So that's.
I mean, the order doesn't really matter, but yeah.
We all know what Ryan wants. Don't take a scalpel to my lovely paint job. This is so ugly with the wheels.
I don't know what you're talking. Hang on,
Oh yeah, gotta put them on.
put them on properly.
Put your face
This is
on.
final assembly.
Better than on my hands. The O-rings of destiny. Flawless.
We should get 2 extra screws as well for completeness. You're going to get a camera on this moment.
Oh yeah, you probably should, shouldn't I?
Ow, 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 and ooh. Right. Let's put the small stuff down first.
No, put it on.
No, because I don't want to see it until it's there, you know?
Well, I can't put
Is
the
the
rope.
link on there?
Yeah, the link's in there.
Uh,
1.417.
no.
Yep.
No.
Yep.
No.
Nailed it. Right, I'm driving it.
Right, so that means I can do a fresh bottom plate.
Yeah. Where's the link gone? Safety.
Where have we taken to... We must have been putting too much stuff in.
We've just been like shaving weight off and
Yeah, but not nearly 100 grams.
paint's evaporated and all this
I mean, the
other
paint evaporating clearly didn't happen.
all that other good
The
stuff.
wedge didn't go down at all. You got any spare cans around?
I think, rather annoyingly.
I bet you have.
No, I think I finished it. I think I threw all the stuff away yesterday. So. Oh no, we're in luck.
Yeah, luck. Let's say it's luck.
My addiction has once again paid off.
So it's time to finally demonstrate the awesome finished power of Hello There.
No, we haven't got that. We haven't got a thing on. We've got to.
It's because it's meant to have a hole for it, Sam, isn't it? It seems really meaty when it retracts.
It feels like it hits harder the other way.
So just put your face over it on camera. It's like catching a bullet in your teeth.
Right, stand clear. Stand well back. Oh no!
No, what was that?
This has slipped off the thing.
Oh, it's only slipped, that's okay.
Just effortlessly take the thing out.
So that was a very quick slippage that time, wasn't it?
Yeah. How disappointing. We were doing so well.
I think we need to do a little ABS washer that is just oversized.
Yep.
And then we maybe need to glue it very solidly to the outside of the pulley. And again, as I said, if I'd wrapped it around there like I was thinking of, that wouldn't have happened. You get the other side of the screw at least.
I'm working on it.
That's something that I changed last minute as well. I feel silly for having done it.
Well, no, it'll tweeze this. I don't think I can get over that.
It's just too tight for us to be able to do something. I mean, we could take that screw out and put it back in.
We certainly could do. We get a bit more.
That should go. It's worrying that it would go, but it should go.
There we go. Nicely over like that.
It does however put it at greater risk of slipping off the other side, but if it goes the other side, it shouldn't get itself down between axe and pulleys. We'll just lose a little bit of the rounding off.
Yeah. Right. What I've foolishly done is I've turned it off without bringing it. So this is where the axe is, and I'm going to turn it on, and it's just going to fire backwards.
Well, better do that then.
Cut. Right. I am a bit more nervous about doing it this time because I don't actually know what's going to happen.
I thought it only did it when we powered on the receiver.
I don't know what it will do.
Yeah, it's only on receiver power on that it does it.
Well,
Yeah, that is very slack.
right, so now,
Again, we could do some gluing down here.
I know, we just want to make it safe. Do I do this one first or do I do the other one? I don't. I'm just going to, and do that. Now you can touch it.
Yeah, retract is now loose as fuck. Oh, this was a bad idea. In fact, the firing one also looks loose.
We're putting a lot of force through it. We put a lot more force through that than we are capable of putting with our hands.
I think we're just going to need to flange it more than it is. And we have the weight to do it.
Yeah, right. Not today, though.
No, not today. Not until we get there, I don't think, really.
We should try and get a chance in the week to do it. We should do the final little bits. We should stick a hole in for for this, and then call it a day. And I think at that point we can do a little video explaining it all.
Yep. It's only 20 past 4, it's not gone badly.
Yeah. And we have built a pink robot.
A very pink robot.
A very pink robot.
So, first things first, drill out where the link needs to be. That's basically only thing only.
Yeah, right. GoPro, stop recording.